Hello, and welcome to an American Talk Show. I'm your host, David Allard. I'm an attorney from Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and I have a couple of guests with me today. Kenny, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Kenneth Carver. I am also from Fitchburg, Massachusetts. Fitchburg, Massachusetts is a town located in central Massachusetts with a population of about 40,000 people.
And Hal?
Um, my name is Hal Allard. I'm a software developer. Live in Phillipston.
All right, thank you. And today's subject is Obamacare, which is a very important issue to people and a very controversial issue. And I'd like to talk about what is Obamacare, first of all. Just the nuts and bolts of it. Of course, you can go to their website and they give an explanation. But it is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. And what does it do? It mandates that everyone, with some exceptions, must have insurance. And if you don't get the insurance, there's penalties. These penalties are enforceable through the Internal Revenue Service. For example, if you don't pay, if you don't get health insurance the first year, then you'll be penalized $95 or 1% of your annual income, whichever is greater. And if you don't do it subsequent years, those numbers reach $695 or 2.5% of your annual income by the year 2016. So it's imperative that you get health insurance or these penalties will come in place. And 2.5% of most people's gross income is a considerable amount of money to pay in penalties. Of course, Obamacare also applies to businesses, and businesses, especially with businesses with 50 or more employees, they'll have to pay, if they don't get health care for their employees, they'll be paying $2,000 an employee, up to $3,000 an employee if they purchase through the health insurance marketplace and they use the credits. But it's not strictly the number of employees that you have, it's the basically number of man hours that you use. If you had 40 employees instead of 50, but those guys were working overtime, then you'd fall within the purview of the statute too. So now you know what Obamacare is supposed to be doing. The question is, where do you get the insurance, and do you have to get Obamacare insurance? And the fact of the matter is, if you have your own insurance that covers the essential items, then that would be good enough. If you don't have your insurance, then they want you to get insurance, or you can get it through state websites. Those websites are called the marketplace, insurance marketplace. So you can go onto their websites and sign up for an insurance program there, and sign up for coverage. When you do the marketplace insurance, although there are no preconditions, they say they're not going to look at you for preconditions. They will look at you for conditions that will affect your rates and can really jack up your premiums. For example, if you are overweight or you smoke, that can cause your premiums to skyrocket. Just a little bit of court background of Obamacare. The monumental case on it, or landmark case, was decided in the Supreme Court of the United States with National Federation of Independent Business, AL, versus Sebelius, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That came from the 11th Circuit, and it went to the Supreme Court. It was argued and decided on June 28, 2012. In it, basically, Congress enacted the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act in order to increase the number of Americans covered by health insurance and decrease the cost of health care. One key provision is the individual mandate, and that's what we're dealing with here, which requires most Americans to maintain minimal and essential health insurance coverage. For individuals who are not exempt and who do not receive health insurance through an employer or government program, the means of satisfying the requirements is to purchase insurance from a private company. So basically, the state is requiring you to get insurance and they're going to require you to get it through a private company unless you're a government employee. So they're insisting that you get it through a private agency to get coverage. And this did benefit, of course, the insurance companies. The stocks rose from this. But it said beginning in 2014, those who do not comply with the mandate must take a, quote, shared responsibility payment, unquote, to the federal government. The Act provides that this penalty will be paid to the Internal Revenue Service within individual's taxes and shall be assessed and collected in the same manner as tax penalties. 26 states and several individuals and the National Federation of Independent Businesses brought this suit in the federal district court to contest this. They're challenging the constitutionality of the individual mandate. There was another portion of the statute they challenged also, but that was struck down. We don't really have to deal with that now. It's called the Medicaid Expansion Act. But basically, we're dealing with the individual mandate here. Chief Justice Roberts delivered the opinion of the court, and he concluded that the individual mandate is not a valid exercise of Congress's power under the Commerce Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause, because they tried to justify this under those two clauses of the Constitution. They said this act is constitutional under the Commerce Clause, powers granted to Congress, and Necessary and Proper Clause. Justice Roberts said no, that doesn't give them the authority, those two clauses. It's kind of interesting. He said, upholding the Affordable Care Act under the Commerce Clause would give the Congress the same license to regulate what people do and not do. Basically, the framers knew the differences between doing something and not doing something. So they gave the Congress the power to regulate commerce. So Chief Justice Roberts is saying, in this scenario, you're asking to regulate inactivity. So if someone doesn't give insurance, how can you regulate that under the Commerce Clause? How can you call that commerce? And he said the framers knew the difference between doing something and not doing something. Therefore, Congress does not have power under that clause. However, he did say that the Congress did have the power to enact this individual mandate based on the taxing clause. He said that basically this is a tax to everybody, and under their taxing power, they can do it. He said none of this is to say that payment is not intended to induce the purchase of health insurance, but the mandate need not be read to declare that failing to do so is unlawful. Neither the Affordable Care Act nor any other law attaches negative legal consequences to not buying health insurance beyond requiring a payment to the IRS. In Congress's choice of language, the individual shall obtain insurance or pay a penalty does not require reading this as a punishing an unlawful act. It must be also read as imposing a tax on those who go without insurance. So basically, he's saying Congress can do it under the taxing power, and that's okay. And when you make such an act legal based on their taxing power, you're saying, although you said by not doing an activity, not having an act, Congress could not regulate your inaction based on the Commerce Clause. But now you can regulate a person's inaction based on the taxing power. So you're going to penalize the guy for not doing anything. You're going to tax him, enforceable with the Internal Revenue Service, and all that brings for inaction. And not only that, you're taxing them, but you're making them buy from a private industry. So it seems to me that the camel has its nose in the tent, and soon the whole body will be inside. Because if a government can impose a tax on people unless they get insurance. Kenny, why can't they impose a tax on people who fail to lose weight? Why can't they? How about people who are eating red meat? Or how about people that fail to wear sunglasses? How about people who, when they're driving? Or how about people who smoke? Why can't you? What's the limit? Why can't you impose a tax under the taxing clause and say, you know, the government wants you to do this, and if you don't, there's going to be taxes and penalties. Aren't we doing the same thing?
Start telling you that you're going to get taxed for not having insurance. They're basically telling you have to have it, because they're not telling you what not to do. They're telling you what to do, because they're telling you if you don't do something, you get taxed. They're almost forcing you to do something. So what, like you said, what's coming up next? Are they going to start telling you what you can drive or can't drive? It seems like it just seems like they're trying to control you, if anything.
Right. And I see it the same way. And I've read some people comments who've read the opinion, and they said the same thing. That you're basically giving Congress the power to implement legislation with the tax clause to do anything they want. There's no. Hal, what would you say about that?
Well, what people should understand is in this bill, there's actually wording that gives the Secretary power to do what she deems necessary. So, there's one part where they say information to the registry if deemed necessary by the Secretary to protect the public health. So if it says deemed by the Secretary could just make legislation to do whatever the Secretary wants, and everybody just has to follow whatever the Secretary says, because it's so open-ended in the legislation. I think what people should understand is that the Obamacare regulations is 10,516 words in the regulations. That's 10,516 pages of regulations. That's 8 times as many pages as the Bible. So who out there is going to be able to sort through this stuff, the average person, and read it and understand what's being shoved down their throat? Just like Pelosi can stand up there and say, okay, well, let us pass it, and then when it's passed, then everybody can understand what it's all about, right? And that's ridiculous. It's like, okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll just agree with whatever they want to do, and we'll just go along with it. It's absurd.
So it opens the door in several ways. First of all, it opens the door for Congress to pass legislation using the taxing power to regulate human behaviors. And the court's not going to get in the way of it. The court's not going to stop it. They're going to say, well, they can use their tax power and penalty if you don't, if they think it's necessary for the general welfare, they can do it. So the Constitution now doesn't protect people and private property from this type of this invasion, according to the Supreme Court. They're not going to. If Congress wants to enact such a thing, they can do it. And I think this decision surprised a lot of people.
So would you agree with me that I don't think the government's interested in really making health care affordable or available to everybody, because that's what I know Obamacare is saying, that they want every American to have insurance. I don't think that's what it's about. It's about forcing you to do something that they want you to do without you having a control over it.
But I think there's truth in that. I think there's a couple things happening. First of all, the health, half the country didn't have insurance. There really is a problem that had to be addressed. And it's like Rahm Emanuel said, doesn't let any good crisis go to waste. There really is a health care crisis. The question is, was this the appropriate way to deal with it? And was there another way of dealing with it? And when you have a document that's 10 million words long, that has a lot of open terms, you're giving the federal government a lot of power to do a lot of things. And there's other problems with this. Because what happens is, if you mandate a lot of the poor people, or lower class people, they can sign up for the health insurance, and they can get free health insurance. They qualify. Okay. But then the other people, all right, the other people who the government, under their standard, says, well, they make enough money to be able to afford health insurance. What's going to happen to their health insurance rates?
Not only that, how is the government going to come up with all this money to afford people to have free health insurance?
Well, that's where it's coming from. What happens is, it's going to be on the backs of the people through the insurance rates that are employed.
So are you saying they're going to raise taxes?
No, they're going to raise the insurance. The insurance rates will be raised. So they are the ones who are going to be subsidizing the other people. So what that ends up being is a redistribution of wealth from say the middle class with paying higher insurance rates to cover the lower class, which can't afford to pay. But I mean, there really is a healthcare issue. Oftentimes, 50% of the bankruptcies last year had to do with medical expenses. People couldn't pay their medical bills. But I'm not sure this is the right vehicle to do it. For example, what does the government do in the banking industry? What happens? What do they do with FDIC? They do is they insure it, right? They insure people's funds in the bank, correct?
Right.
They protect it. Why couldn't they insure the medical industry the same way? So, I mean, maybe the government does have to take an action, but this is a pretty drastic action. So, and I think a lot of people, especially the poor people, are going to say, wow, this is great. I'm going to get health insurance. And they're going to be in favor of it. But it ends up being a socialized medicine program, just like they have in England and elsewhere. Al, what do you think of it?
Well, I think Obamacare is going to exert enormous control over physicians, and it's going to drive them out of private practice. And I think the goal is to put everybody in a hospital kind of atmosphere instead of the private physicians because of the regulations. They're going to press down on them. So I don't think the desired effect is going to be what everybody thinks.
I think you're right, and I know that you've read some of the provisions that in Obamacare right now, and what did you learn about some of the developments that they have for it?
Well, one thing that scares me the most about the Obamacare is the National Medical Device Registry. So what that is everybody and every device is going to go into a database. So the government wants to take control of RFID technology and any technology that a company develops for medical purposes that contains information, personal information about any individual. They want to take that information and they want to store it in a central database. So not only that, but they want to make all of those companies who make that technology hand over everything as soon as the legislation goes into place. And if they don't do it, there's going to be a $10,000 fine and a $1,000 fine every day that they don't deliver that information to the federal government. So the federal government is going to have all kinds of personal information on every individual. So they can start profiling people based upon certain criteria. I mean, when your information goes into the government's hands, all this personal information, they can start profiling people and saying, oh, well, look at this person's probably they're developing diabetes, but we see that they're eating way too much ice cream, right, or something like that. So maybe they implement a tax on eating too much ice cream. You know, it can get really crazy.
Just like the NSA on steroids?
What Obamacare does is it says, okay, well, we're going to have the IRS hire 15,000 new employees to handle this legislation.
It seems to me that the NSA got in trouble because of the Snowden incident and the fact that they were monitoring emails and things like this. But this seems like a carte blanche program for the government to gather information on everybody.
Well, it brings it to a whole new level. And maybe they make the bills look attractive by putting in some eye candy about helping some people and whatnot. But the real thing is it's a bill about control. And everybody is saying, okay, well, I agree that if I don't pay for health insurance, you can give me jail time or you can give me fines. I mean, that's whatever happened to living free, right? It's now if you breathe air, you're liable to pay tax, right? It's just it's absolutely getting out of control. And when you say, oh well, whatever the secretary deems necessary, and you just put that in there, it's okay, well, you should probably define what deemed necessary is, not just whatever the person thinks that has control over you, right?
One part that you had mentioned to me in the past that was the RFID chip.
Right.
What do you think about the legislation with regard to that?
So in Bill 3200, they had this section in there for the National Medical Device Registry. And I'll read it to you. The National Medical Device Registry, the Secretary shall establish a National Medical Device Registry in a subsection referred to as the registry to facilitate analysis of post-market safety and outcomes data on each device that is or has been used in or on a patient, which there's two devices there in Section B. It's a Class 3 device and a Class 2 device. The Class 2 device is what is implantable, meaning an RFID chip. So people saw that wording and they were up in arms about it. So what they did is they reworded it and they took it out of Bill 3590, but they changed the wording around and they just changed it to medical devices. So anytime you see the word medical device, and you look up the definition, say, look up 3590, what's the definition of a medical device? It says, for the purpose of the term medical device means any device as defined in section of the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act 21. So you go over to the Food and Drug Act in 21, and lo and behold, there you go. It's the implantable radio frequency transponder system for patient identification and health information. So it's a sleight of hand. It's okay, well, we're going to remove this wording from 3200 that says implantable, and then we're just going to do a little word craftery and change it to medical device, which refers over to the FDA, which tells you what that device is. So it's like you really have to read these bills carefully and understand what terms they're trying to use.
Sure.
Well, if you read 3590, you'll see there is like 12 references of the medical devices, and it seems like a lot of these sections are just about the use of the medical devices. To give you an example, section 9011. The study of the report effect on veterans' health care. And one line there is veterans' access to medical devices and branded prescription drugs. I mean, why do you have to, in every section, the section about women, they put a line there and they talk about the medical devices, and they're really emphasizing medical devices.
I think that RFID chip is a data collecting tool for them. They can store a lot of data on that. And I think what they probably will do is say, well, okay, you want health insurance, you have to agree to have the implant. We'll put that in your arm, and they'll back it up. They'll say, well, the reason we need to do that is because we want to make sure that only residents, only citizens are getting the health care. Or we want to make sure that you qualify. There'll be some trumped up reason to make sure that they have the implant and they can use that data for some legitimate reason. And they'll say, well, we want to check your medical history. We don't want to make a mistake with your medical history. We want to see who treated you last. What kind of medications did you get last? And that chip can store all that information.
But they don't need a chip to find that information. But they could keep a file on the internet or anywhere that you get medical treatment. They can find it on a computer. They don't need to put a chip in you to know that.
They don't, but they can use it to track. So
True.
So anyway, so it leaves a lot of room for abuse. And but what I'm thinking is that people will say, well, if I'm going to do what I need to do to get health insurance for my family. So if they say, okay, listen, you got kids, you need insurance, okay, you want to make sure your kid's okay. We just want it's no bigger than a grain of rice. We just want you to put this in your arm. How many people are going to say no? They're going to say, well, my kids need health care. I need health care.
Or you'll go to jail if you don't have it. So it's either
I still
the chip or the
believe
jail.
a lot of people. I still believe a lot of people are going to say no.
I'm hoping, but I think
I think people are going to realize it's just a matter of they don't want to be controlled.
Well, so this is the fear of it. So back to the fact that there is a health insurance problem. It is a health insurance crisis. I think there are other ways of dealing with that problem other than opening power granted to the federal government with a statute like this, because it leaves such possibilities for abuse. But I think what we have here is, with the healthcare issue, is really symptomatic of what's happening in the United States overall. There's a deindustrialization of the United States. It's been going on significantly. This was an issue back for the framers, back in the 1700s, and they enacted protectionist legislation. And they said, well, in order for our businesses to compete against the other countries, we have to enact import taxes. Okay, we have to do that, and they gave 4 reasons why they needed to have this. For example, industries or businesses can be competitive for 4 basic reasons. 1, they don't have the innovations or inventions that other competitors may have, or they don't have the skill sets or organization that their competitors have, or their average wages may be higher, or they lack raw materials. So if you're looking at China and Apple Computer making their products in China, where they can pay them nothing, have them work in factories with suicide nets surrounding them, and they're basically slaves. Well, that can happen in China, it can happen in Cambodia, it can happen in Africa, it can happen in Laos, it can happen in Vietnam, that can happen in the Philippines, it can happen in any of those countries. They have a slave labor source available to them. Well, how are the Americans going to compete? How are the businesses going to compete when all these things can be made for nothing overseas? And without this protectionist legislation in place, and we set in place an import tax, there will be no industry in the United States. It'll be a service industry, and service industry will not cut it. Service industry will not cut it. So the people that can make money in the United States are the people that are wealthy, who have stock in international companies. The international companies use slave labor. They have no allegiance to the United States, but they use slave labor to boost up their profits. And so they have a market base overseas, a market base here. They produce it for nothing, just like Apple, in China. They produce it for nothing, no labor costs, and they work on their bottom line. Well, if I'm an American citizen and I own 100,000 shares of Apple Computer, I'm happy, right? But if you're an American citizen and you don't, and you're looking for work, you don't have it. The job's not available. So the global companies, the international globalist companies like Apple, they have no allegiance to the United States. They use the world for their industry, and they're just worried about their bottom line. So, and this again, this is not a new problem. The framers in the Constitution, Alexander Hamilton, recognized it. And here's an example. There are two programs. One is called GATT, which is called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It was established in 1947 to minimize tariffs and restrictions and to liberalize trade among all the capitalist countries. In 1995, GATT became the World Trade Organization, or WTO. With the collapse of communism, its open markets and low tariff ideology became dominant worldwide in the 90s. So you can see what happened. American industry and labor prospered after World War II, but hard times set in after 1970. For the first time, there was stiff competition from low-cost producers around the globe. Many Rust Belt industries faded out or collapsed, especially the manufacture of steel, TV sets, shoes, toys, textiles, and clothing. Toyota and Nissan threatened the giant domestic auto industry. In the late 70s, Detroit and the Auto Workers Union combined to fight for protection. They obtained not high tariffs, which is what they needed, but a voluntary restriction of imports from the Japanese government. Quotas were two-country diplomatic agreements that had the same protective effects, supposedly, theoretically, as high tariffs, but did not invite retaliation from third countries. By limiting the number of Japanese automobiles that could be imported, quotas inadvertently helped the Japanese companies push into larger and more expensive market segments. The Japanese producers limited by the number of the cars they could export to America opted to increase the value of the exports to maintain revenue growth. So the only way to industrialize the United States is to have tariffs. Otherwise, the slave labor will drive you completely out of business. And the framers knew that. The other program is NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement. On January 1st, 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, NAFTA, entered into force. All remaining duties and quantitative restrictions were eliminated, scheduled on January 1st, 2008. NAFTA created the world's largest free trade area, which now links 450 million people, producing $17 trillion worth of goods and services. Trade between the United States and NAFTA and partners has soared since the agreement. In the U.S. goods and service trade deficit with NAFTA was $41 billion in 2009. So the failure of Congress and the President to implement protectionist policies have derailed our industry. And that is the way it's going to go. And if anybody tells you this country can make it on service, they're telling you wrong. You have to have manufacturing. You have to have industry. So now, back to the problem. When you deindustrialize a whole group of citizens or a population, they have no job. They need insurance. They have to have it. It's a necessity. They have to have health care. So this has created a crisis in the healthcare industry because people can't afford to buy anything. So what do you do with them? So what's the solution? You're treating the symptom when you enact a government legislation that puts everybody on a welfare redistribution rather than treating the cause, which is the deindustrialization of the nation itself. Hal, what do you think about that?
What you said is correct, that more and more businesses or their incentives are going to be to move elsewhere. I know part of the legislation of Obamacare is because of healthcare reasons, most likely companies won't want their employees working 40 hours at full time, so they'll cut them down so they don't have to pay the heavy fees of the insurance. So, that creates people making less money. So I think at some point the economy is probably going to crash, and then you're going to talk about a global, a global economy where the president will probably try to cull everybody into a global system, which I'm not sure how they're going to handle it at that time.
I think you're right, and I think the problem is that they won't have the money even to run this program. Even trying to get the money from insurance companies with the people who are employed, because the people that are employed may already have insurance through their companies, so that the people that are independent contractors who have to pay their own insurance are not going to be able to pay for the insurance with all the people that qualify for free insurance with Obamacare. So the government's going to have to pick up the slack on that ultimately. So I think it's going to be a tremendous cost. I think they calculated it'd be a tremendous cost, and already we are in debt. Kenny, where do you see this heading?
I don't think it's heading in the right direction. Once again, I think it comes down to power and control. Obamacare, is good in a sense where they want to have everybody have insurance. But the problem is where's all this money going to come from when somebody decides to go to the hospital and it costs, let's say, $10,000? Is it going to put this country in debt? How much money are they going to spend on healthcare? It makes you wonder, are they turning healthcare now into a business?
And I'd like to put out something that Supreme Court Justice John Marshall said in McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819. He said, "The power to tax is the power to destroy." And yet, the Supreme Court said that the government can use their taxing power to implement legislation. Imagine how what the framers of the Constitution would have thought. George Washington and John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, what they would have thought if you told them that there's going to be a centralized government, and the centralized government is going to order everybody to get insurance in all the states. They're going to have to get insurance, and that they're going to be penalized and taxed if they don't get it. I mean, they had a problem with the T-tax from a centralized government. So what would they think of that?
They're going to create a lot of problems if they start penalizing people for not having this insurance. The first problem they're going to run into is, let's just say someone doesn't follow their rules and they get fined or taxed. They decide not to pay that tax. I was online earlier reading they'll find a way to stop you from either renewing your license or finding a way from stopping you from doing something that you need to do in everyday life. Everybody knows that if you, for example, get a ticket for speeding and you don't pay the ticket, the registry gets notified and you can't renew your license until you either pay the fine or deal with the problem. It once again comes down that they're trying to control what you do, and they want to know basically what you're doing. The second problem with Obamacare I have is they're saying that if you don't get it, you could be criminalized. But they should, I feel that if somebody in America decides not to want to have insurance, whatever their reason is, maybe they're single and they don't have any kids and they just don't care, and you start now arresting people, so how much money does that cost the federal system to put people incarcerated for not having health insurance?
And what does it do to your freedom? Because now you can't take a risk. You're not free to take a risk anymore, because the government is saying, no, you're costing us when you take a risk. So if it's going to cost us for you to take a risk, we're going to mandate that you can't take a risk. Al, what do you think about that?
And to complement that, if they're storing all the information on every individual that can't be deleted once it's on file, it's on file. They can determine by looking at what you do and what disease you may have that they're going to pass legislation based upon your habits.
Right. And they specifically mention that your rates may skyrocket based on the fact of what your weight is. And they've been trying to implement weight controls in the school system, public school system, and dietary controls. And suggesting that if you're overweight, that's bad. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for the whole society. So you got to get your weight in the right place. And so they're going to mandate that you be healthy. And they say in their statute that our focus is on wellness. So they're going to be watching what you do, what you eat, and what your weight is. How do you feel about that?
Well, as Kenny was pointing out earlier, is all these legislations, and now you're going to penalize people, and then the jails are already overflowing, and you're going to put more people in jail for all these things you're not following. You eat too much.
I think that the problem is going to be the people out there, especially the people who have no insurance or poor, already lost their job. They're going to be desperate, and you're holding out a carrot for them, and they're going to grab it because that's all they have. And if it means getting an FID chip or giving up privacy, because they're in a desperate state, because the country's been deindustrialized, they're going to take it. They're going to snap it up, and they're going to want you to do it too. So I think it's a problem that we're going to have, and I really am afraid to see where this is going to lead. But to me, it looks like it's going to lead to a socialist and a state-controlled society. I'd like to thank you guys for coming and talking about it today, and I'm hoping we made a difference in our words, and hopefully convince some people out there to be careful about what they're signing on to, and to contact their congressman and see what we can do to repeal this act and replace it with something more beneficial for the public. Thank you very much. It's a wrap.